All right, am I better?
You
Yep.
better. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 28th edition of the Decaturish.com Twitch show. We're back after a month being off. Had some stuff going on. Couldn't Twitch for a while, but I am your host, editor, and publisher Dan Wisenhunt. We do plan to resume doing these every Wednesday for the most part, especially as local elections come up. Our guests today are people that our regular viewers will know very well, and that is Decatur's contributors George Chidi and Hans Utz. How are you gentlemen doing today?
Just
Woo!
fine. Good to
Yeah,
see everybody.
doing
Meaning
just. It is good to see y'all. It's been
this
it's been a
screen.
minute.
Yeah.
Um, so George, you've while I throw our link up on the socials, can you tell us a little bit about your new gig with Fox Soul? Tell
Oh
everybody what you're
my,
doing over there.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm now like talk showy.
yeah.
Like I've graduated to my late night talk show phase. Like this is like I'll be DJing in Ibiza at some point. Like that's where this goes. Um, so Fox Soul is this thing you can get on Roku, like or like video on demand. Like so, use your like Apple TV or whatever the hell it is, and it's like Fox only it's talk show Fox, only it's black people talk show Fox, not Tucker Carlson being a white supremacist Fox. Like it's not really Fox. It's like they've got the label and they paid for it, but nothing of its management reports to anybody at Fox Corporate, as far as I could tell, because I have standards. Um,
Because
the
they keep inviting you back, is
yeah,
what you're
there's that.
saying.
Um, So there's a talk show host named Tammy Mack, and she's the number one. She's the Frank Ski in L.A. Like she's the number one talk show host in Los Angeles, and they gave her a television show on this that airs at like midnight, or it tapes at 11 p.m. tonight. Actually, like so, I woke up this morning at whenever and got on the morning news on Fox 5 to tout my appearance on Fox Soul at 11 o'clock tonight. Like, my Wednesdays suck.
And I've
It's a
got
good
to
gig.
ask,
Yeah.
like the audience at 5 o'clock in the morning, the same one that's watching it at midnight. You know,
No. And at some point they'll catch on. I'm waiting.
well, there
Like,
may be this.
I should tell them that. Like, stop talking to me about the morning shit. Like, get me on your afternoon show so that somebody who's actually going to be alive. Nobody. I don't know. I know nothing.
You know nothing,
Like,
Jon Snow.
it's a it's an interesting gig. I'm not. They're paying me.
Well, you have a
That's great.
talent for being able to talk on the fly, and that's what they care about. You don't
Yeah.
just get like deer in headlights when the camera comes on. You're able to make it work for yourself. So that's what they're.
You can't even see the camera on your computer there. What are you doing?
All
Oh,
right.
so what you got up for us today, Dan?
Well, like I said, we're just kind of pushing the reset button a little bit on the Twitch show. We've been off for a month. I had some personal stuff that came up. Trying to, so I was actually just throwing our link out on the socials so people would join us and watch what's going on. I was talking a little bit about the upcoming year where we're going to be doing a lot. There's going to be elections in every city: Decatur, Atlanta, Avondale. So that's going to be a lot of what our Twitch show is going to be, especially towards the end of the summer, because we're going to try to do a lot of forums. Just had some general housekeeping stuff on Decatur's this week. We hired our first reporter,
Congratulations.
Zoe Seiler, our first ever. I am a job creator. I could put that on a bumper sticker and tell people I did a thing. Uh, so that's cool. Zoe Seiler, she's awesome. Y'all are going to get to know her. Many of you already know her from covering Avondale Estates and Kirkwood and all that. Not Kirkwood, Avondale Estates and Clarkston. But she's going to be covering Avondale Estates, Decatur, Kirkwood, some of the greater Decatur area, and all that. So you will get to see a lot more of her, which is great. I will be Still doing Decaturish stuff. I'm also going to be doing a lot more stuff on our other site, which is the TuckerObserver.com. And, be frank about it, the reason that we start more sites is because we got to have more places to, put the ads. So that's kind of where we're going next, is to beef up that site a little bit. We had some pretty.
I mean, it's how William Randolph Hearst started.
Yeah, I hope I'm a
Is that
lot.
where you're gonna end up?
Yeah, hope I'm a lot more chill than he was. A little
Yeah.
less tyrannical. I don't want to be like subject of like Citizen Kane, Part 2 or whatever the hell it was. But we had some big news in Decatur this week. Superintendent David Duty has parted ways with the district. So we're going to try our best to explain the situation to people who don't know what it's about. So City Schools of Decatur is currently the target of 5 different federal lawsuits, all of which were filed within the last 12 months. So that's a lot of litigation. One of those lawsuits was filed by the former Human Resources Director, a man by the name of David Adams. And David Adams alleged that the reason that he and former Finance Director Susan Hurst left the district back in December of 2019 was because they had started questioning the way Superintendent David Duty had used his vacation time. They said that he was taking way more time off than he was contractually allowed to do. And that's why they both resigned at the same time. So when that lawsuit was filed, I basically said, challenge accepted, and I decided to go on ahead and, take a look and see if there's any merit to the allegations. Yes, Clarence, it is a good time to be an attorney in Decatur, for sure. And we found that there were some pieces of evidence that supported the claims that the superintendent was gone for longer than he reported. There's of course some nuance to all that, but generally speaking, there was some evidence to support it. And so we've been at this for a couple of months. The lawsuit was filed in January. We've been hitting the story pretty hard to the point of probably alienating some folks. But in this case, it has to be done. Accountability doesn't happen any other way unless you literally hold someone's feet to the fire, and that's what we've been doing. So it all culminated on the 15th. I believe it was the 15th, they put the superintendent on administrative leave. And then yesterday, Tuesday, they decided to part ways with him. We don't know if that was his decision, if that was a mutual decision. One of the things that we are continuing to look into are not only the allegations against the superintendent, but also how the board allowed this to happen. And what were the circumstances that allowed for this whole situation to unfold the way that it did? Another interesting part of this story has to do with his contract. So they had approved his contract renewal last fall, and it was going to go into effect July 1. Well, I started looking at the contract, and I found out it was a very, very lopsided contract in favor of the superintendent. Made it harder and more expensive to fire him. And so I called the board, and I was like, did y'all know that this was here? And, I haven't really been able to get a whole lot of straight answers about who knew what and when and all that. But
It's worth, Dan, if you don't mind me interjecting, because I think it's worth expanding on that right now, just so the folks listening have
Please,
a real
Hans has also been, in full disclosure, Hans and I have worked very closely on the stories. We've both been looking at the same records. Hans has written a couple of editorial pieces for us about it, but I'm sorry to cut you off, but
sure.
Just wanted to put that out there.
So the contract, the original contract for the superintendent, Dr. Duty, was drafted when he was first hired, 6 years or so ago, and it is pretty boilerplate, right? The thing about superintendent contracts are There's hundreds of them to use as templates, and large swaths of a superintendent contract need, especially I mean, at least within the state of Georgia, large swaths of that contract should actually be fairly standard. There's Georgia law that references employees and employees of public systems. There's a whole host of different things that are out there that are fairly standard. And if you read 20 different superintendent contracts, you start seeing exactly the same structure over and over again, with the, differences in salary, differences in, minor elements of benefits. And, there's things that change, but broadly, they're fairly similar contracts. The second contract that he signed was also a fairly similar, it looked like other contracts. This third contract that, Dan, you were just referencing, the one that was supposed to go into effect in the summer that you used the term lopsided on, I think that undersells how egregious this contract was. It is remarkably different from any other contract that had been done before. Large swaths of it are completely different and changed, and it doesn't follow a typical boilerplate structure that literally every other superintendent contract that I looked at the APS superintendent contracts, I looked at DeKalb county superintendent contracts, and those are for massively more complex systems than
a lot shorter
Decatur.
too, smaller.
Yeah. And so I looked at a whole bunch of different things in terms of benchmarking, and this last contract it's hard to overstate how just off the reservation in terms of what you would expect to see in a contract, and how literally every change made in it not just slightly favored Duty, but dramatically favored Dr.
Made it harder to fire him. It made it incredibly hard to fire him.
And much more remunerative to him in the case that a firing did happen. And just a whole lot of there's no scenario where those changes were put into that contract without full awareness of at least one board member. There's no way that happened without them somebody knowing, right, and without representation of the schools knowing. I cannot. I know a lot of people are upset with Dr. Duty about things, but if somebody sticks a contract that super favors me in front of me regarding my employment, I'm not going to necessarily say no. Like I can't get super angry at Dr. Duty for signing a contract that dramatically favored him. What I can be a little frustrated about, and I think the citizens of Decatur have expressed frustration about this, is how is the board, who is supposed to hold Dr. Duty accountable and who is supposed to be looking after the best interests of the electors, the parents, the residents of Decatur, where were they in this process, and how did they allow that thing to happen? Because it was an abomination of a contract.
Yeah, it was. Go ahead, George.
No, it's just that. There's a serious principle of contract law and lawyers. Like, this is lawyering 101.
Yep.
I do not have a law degree, but I was taught that this was lawyering 101 in all of my classes about how to deal with lawyers. And so the first question I would ask is, who actually wrote the contract? Because I can imagine somebody who's on David Duty's side, for lack of a better word, writing this contract as a starting place for negotiation, except there was no negotiation. Here are my terms, bang. And then there's a counter offer from the school board that says, no, screw that, here's yours. And then they argue to the middle.
Yep.
Only that didn't happen. And so I think you're asking the right question. How did, who actually wrote this thing, and how did it happen?
Yeah, I think the important point that I need to reiterate with my audience, because this story in particular has really tested my relationship with some core segments of my audience, and I understand why. Because when you move to City Schools of Decatur, consumers want to feel good about their decisions, and you don't want to move and spend all that tax money in a school district and be told that the place you just moved to has problems. I get why people are reflexively defensive about it. I would just say, Decatur schools aren't in and of themselves bad schools. They're phenomenal schools, and that has not changed. Am I a little quiet? Can you hear me?
Oh no, I hear you just fine.
Okay, saying I'm a little quiet. I'll try to speak up. Um, Anywho, so that is definitely something I understand, and there I think is a desire to move on. Now that David Duty has gone, and there is going to be some sentiment of why are you still talking about this? And the reason that I'm still talking about it is because we don't know how this happened. And that's an important piece of information because it doesn't need to happen again. There doesn't need to be another scenario where people are confused about what the expectations of the superintendent of the city schools of Decatur are, and people don't seem to know how long he's supposed to work and when he's supposed to work. That apparently needs to be, codified and spelled out in future contracts. So
Well,
this
so
is the
let me
accountability piece that we're
yeah
doing now.
let me opine on that too for just a second, because that's actually been the excuse that the board and Dr. Duty have kind of said all along, that my contract didn't actually specifically spell out how many days I'm supposed to work.
Right.
But no superintendent contract that. Like, it's sort of
Right.
every superintendent contract is just presumed to be a 12-month contract. When you're dealing with a teacher, for example, they do explicitly call out the number of days because some classes and some roles have different amounts of time that they're supposed to work within the school system, right? That's not the case for the superintendent, at least in any other superintendent contract that I read in the state of Georgia. It's just baseline presume that it's 12 months. So try to use that excuse that it wasn't explicitly spelled out in the contract, that's a legalistic argument that doesn't pass muster with just a common sense read of what you would expect of a superintendent. The other thing, and you were mentioning about why it's important to continue to push on the case, and on the issue is because we don't know how it happened, and because we don't know who is responsible on the accountability side for letting it happen. Those individuals are still there, and yes, we have a great school system. We have a great school system because parents pay attention and ensure that the people who are supposed to hold people accountable are actually holding them accountable. The best way in the world to end up having a catastrophic hot mess of a school system is for people to stop paying attention and allow the kind of shenanigans that we saw here continue. And so I think we continue to pound this drum until we get absolute, like, the chain of accountability and the clarity all across the board, so that this doesn't ever happen again, so that we can have confidence that we have a phenomenal, fantastic, and continuing to have a phenomenal and fantastic school system going forward.
Well, I have made this argument, and again, we're kind of going through this exercise where I send the school board questions, and they just don't ignore. They just don't acknowledge the questions. They ignore them. They don't respond. I send it to them again. Every once in a while, I get it. We'll respond to that at such and such a date, and it's been like this for 2 months. And part of me understands that they're in litigation, and there are some things that they can and can't talk about. But I really think, and I've made this case to the school board, that it's kind of time to rip the Band-Aid off a little bit here. Let's get as much of the truth out that we can, because it's the difference between this being a few more stories to kind of unravel this and get to the truth of it, or a summer's worth of stories. I don't particularly want to do that. Myself, I've got a lot of things to do. I've got a company to run and a family to take care of. But I will, if that's what I have to do to get the answers to the questions. That's just, I'm obligated to pursue that now. And that's not going to stop. So really, the people who are tired of this story, people who say that we've given too much attention to this, you need to direct all that to the school board, because the school board is the one stringing this thing out, not me. If I had answers to my questions, we could have been done with this by now. But the school board has chosen to take this approach, and it's not fun for any of us, really. I mean,
I mean, I've
it's a
sort of
lot of
enjoyed
work.
the editorials.
Well, you've enjoyed the editorials. I enjoy the reporting side of it, and that's fun. I recognize that they're very, there are people that like him. There are people that depend on him. I get it. I'm not trying to take anybody down. I just want the truth about what
Yep.
happened, and that's really all I care about. So to anybody who has that to anybody that has that thought, I would say, really, the people who are setting the pace on this are the school board. And I know the school board gets sick of my emails, but I'll tell you what, you don't want people doing the whole Mike Wallace thing either, where you show up with the camera and they're going to their car and they're like, "Mr. School Board Member, why won't you answer our question?" Like that whole made-for-TV, ambush interview thing. It's certainly, and I would certainly feel well within my rights to start going to school board meetings, to start asking those questions point blank. But we're trying to move this thing along here and get some accountability. We got a comment that said this is as much, if not more, than an indictment of the school board and city schools of Decatur than of Dr. Duty. I'm disappointed you're getting heat from folks continuing to report on this. COD's big draw and remains its school system. If that fails, those same people will be mad that their house is worth one half the price it was 3 years ago. I mean, bingo. That's exactly right. You
I think it's safe to assume that this is not going to be an uncontested school board election cycle, and that you are going to see people come out and put the qualified and frustrated people are going to put their hats into the ring for some of these board seats coming up.
Well, that's
And
certainly what one would expect.
God bless them. Yep.
I've also seen school board elections where they were unopposed and they were open seats. I think it's worth pointing out that the school board politically is a path to nowhere. It's a lot of drama. The profile is not great, and I don't even think they pay all that much. I think they might pay more.
Oh no, it's not, and it's nothing. So
Yeah,
this is one
it's
thing that I've
nothing.
actually heard school board members get hammered for when they've talked about this, and I personally would support better remuneration for folks that are in that, because that is, I think a lot of people don't realize exactly how much work does go into a role like a school. It's not
Hmm.
just a week, an hour long meeting a month. I have been on these calls where there's multiple preparatory calls, and then a 4 or 5 hour meeting that's the board meeting with lots and lots of um, uh, let's say passionate perspective directed at you, and then you don't, then on top of that you've got all the preparatory work, and you go into classrooms and you meet with teachers and you do, like, there's, it's a big job. It's not a full-time job, but neither is it neither is it 0% of your brain you just have to plug in for a couple hours once a month. Like
Hmm.
it's real work. and
If
and
you're doing it right, it is.
yeah, so I think that if one of the limit, a lot of people talk about, oh, we don't want public servants to be compensated super well because people will get in it for the wrong reasons. I look at the exact opposite, right? If you structure it that way, then only the people that can afford to do public service are the ones that go in and do it. If you want to get a diverse perspective, if you want to get, a single mother, God forbid, on that board, you're going to have to make it worth her while. She can't afford to be on it if you're going to pay him $600 for hours and hours and hours and hours of work. Like, that's what the babysitter costs. And
Hmm.
so you just got to, like, I think there's some, this is a broader question than just Decatur School Board. I think this happens across
Oh
the
yeah.
board in public service, but that's my pitch to the school board for, I would support you voting yourself a raise, because I want to get folks in there that can, that actually can do it.
Yeah, I think arguments over public official compensation tend to be kind of tired for the most part. I think there is a lot of work that goes into it. Obviously, you don't want some situation like they had out in California where people were getting paid way more than was advertised, but that's actually the exception and not the rule. The rule is
Yeah.
normally that public officials are barely compensated
Yeah.
for their time, and it's work. These are professional people. They have things to do. They could be making money doing other things. So yeah, if you want to up the quality of people that you get for a job like that, it's best to pay them. So we're gonna put a pin in that discussion. We have a lot more to talk about with regard to schools. I am trying to get Dr. Maggie Furman, who will be succeeding David Duty on the Twitch show. She's expressed an interest. So hopefully, she'll be able to come on and give us her vision for the school district and what she plans to do over the next year. George, tell us about what in the hell is going on in Stonecrest.
Michael.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
it's a hot mess. What is happening over there?
So Stonecrest. I wanted to ignore Stonecrest, like we all did, like the school board. Like if you blow off municipal government, eventually it will come and take your money away from you.
Mm-hmm.
The short answer that does not get me in libel trouble is that the city got $6.2 million in CARES Act money and can account for a little less than $5 million of that money. And the rest appears to have disappeared one way or another because of companies that didn't exist 3 weeks before the money landed that are connected to the mayor taking it, and for whatever reason, the word kickback has been used regularly at this point and by elected officials. I think it's more complicated than that, but as a practical matter, the mayor is on leave. He says it's because of his health condition, because he's fighting cancer. But as a practical matter, I am told by elected officials that the mayor should expect the FBI to start sending subpoenas and like tossing his house soon. CARES Act, city gets $6.2 million, and a company that was created by the former city attorney emerges to be the steward of this money. It creams $500,000 off the top for no good reason, plus another $250,000 in expenses. And those expenses are wild. It then starts doling out money without a lot of rhyme or reason to companies, many of which aren't in Stonecrest, and $1 million to different churches, including $150 million to Jason Larry, the mayor's own church.
150,000?
150,000.
Okay.
150,000. Sorry, 150 million. $150,000 to Jason Larry's church that they say they didn't ask for, which, like, 50,000 of which was then dealt back to a quote marketing company unquote. The president of which, at least on paper, was one of the deacons who was involved in taking the money at the church, which was also set up by the attorney, like the former city attorney at Stonecrest. Like, it's this sort of thing. Like, he deals they give $25,000 to a car repair place that does like wraps, like you wrap the van and it looks like it's an advertisement. Yeah. Like, and then they're told, yes, well, you have to wrap these two vehicles that are owned by the mayor's son. And I'm like, okay, that's, it's really old school and obvious kinds of corruption.
Yeah, that's literally what I was going to ask. I mean, this isn't the 1950s, right? Like the tracking on this is a little bit more sophisticated now. Like, you can't, like, you're uncovering this is a couple keystrokes of a dogged person, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not.
I don't know what the hell they were thinking. Like,
yeah,
they would get away with this. That's exactly what everybody else is saying too.
Yeah.
Like the elected officials, at Stonecrest, the city council, like attorneys who've been looking at this stuff. Like, it's all like, what did you think was going to happen, Jason?
Yeah. and then like quickly. It's not like it was going to happen and take years to uncover, but I mean like days to unravel
Yeah.
it.
So here's the backstory that I think is actually interesting and worth talking about. So, um, Johnson, the no, I'm sorry, not Johnson. Like Senator Jones,
Yep.
Senator Jones, South DeKalb, saw this train wreck coming like a year ago.
Emmanuel, not Vernon, correct?
Emmanuel Jones,
Right.
Yes.
Senator Emmanuel Jones. That's Vernon's important because he's part of this. Senator Emmanuel Jones saw this train wreck coming and tried to get local legislation going immediately to strip Jason Larry of his power so that he couldn't play games with committee meetings and wasn't chairing this board and that board and didn't have hiring and firing authority over the people who were working at the city, which is how this happened. Like Jones saw it coming and tried to get local legislation. And the problem is, in order to get local legislation through the legislature, every state rep and state senator who represents the area has to agree to it. And if there's even one person who says no, it stops.
Ooh, I wonder who the one person was.
Ding,
Well,
ding.
there you go.
Good Lord. Oh, so for the record, let's tell our listeners.
Vernon Jones.
Vernon
Yeah,
Jones.
shocking.
God,
while he was
gift to
still in
reporters.
office, like represents a piece of Stonecrest and said not just no, but hell no, this isn't passing or going anywhere as long as I'm in office. And then he leaves office. And I think Jason Larry thought that Vernon Jones was going to cover his ass indefinitely and started this stuff without realizing Vernon Jones was going to leave office.
Well, or that he was Vernon Jones and has no track record
Yeah.
of actually doing anything other than
But there-
stomping on people to serve Vernon Jones.
The problem is he wasn't actually the only one. Like so there's a dispute here, but apparently Pam Stevenson was on the bubble, in part because she was suffering from dementia at this point and had been removed from office. And it might actually have been part of the reason she stepped down was because of all of this stuff that was coming.
Mm-hmm.
So the governor delayed the special election to replace Pam Stevenson, which was mind-boggling to everybody involved, but is looking more and more like he wanted to screw up Stonecrest. Like delay until, and then calls it so that the special election would land in January and the runoff would land in the middle of February. At which point, Stan Watson, who has a long relationship with both Vernon Jones and Jason Larry, emerges as a candidate. And God help us, if he had won, he would have stopped the local legislation too. Like, they couldn't get it through until Pam Stevenson's seat was filled. Emmanuel Jones moved heaven and earth. I found out after the fact. In the runoff, where it was Stan Watson and Angela Moore, who's nobody's first choice, God help me, except apparently 500 people in Stonecrest who showed up to vote. He engineered Angela Moore's victory by getting a couple of hundred people he knew to turn out and say not Stan Watson in the runoff. Angela Moore is good for saying yes to paying back the favor to Emmanuel Jones. They get the local legislation. 3 weeks later, all of this stuff comes out.
Whew, that's
That's
lot.
astounding. There's a movie in there somewhere.
Probably.
That's
It
a
is.
lot. I just want to say, for anybody that thinks that Decaturish does a lot of clickbait, if that was really what we wanted to do, we would do nothing but write about Vernon Jones all day long. The man is like catnip to readers. He is. People just read about, a lot of it's hate reading or whatever, but People read stories about the guy. And he's running for governor. Well, it must be my birthday. I mean, that's going to be uh, uh, weeks of funny stories
Yeah.
about Vernon
I
Jones.
want to give him the attention. I want
Well,
to. I
yeah,
Yeah,
want to
there. I mean, there is
dignify
that,
him.
right? That it is because it isn't dignified. It isn't dignified. It is absolute
yeah. And then you got the whole Trump
rot
example where
gut.
people covered him for the exact same reason, just out of a purely perverse, like, ooh, this will be entertaining. Well, look where that got us.
Yeah.
4 years of dystopia. Um, that's all very very interesting as far as what do you think the ultimate
I,
outcome in Stonecrest is going to be, George? Where do you think this is headed?
Few things like so. I don't think the mayor ever becomes a strong mayor again. They're never going to reverse the charter changes. I think Jason Larry is likely to be indicted and then removed from office by the governor. I think it is possible that Jimmy Clanton, who is a city council person in Stonecrest and is tied up with some of this stuff in ways that I find deeply uncomfortable and sad, is also likely to resign or be removed by the governor. Um, can't say who replaces either of them. I think we see Diana Doma remerge. God help us all. Um, the I think the folks in the city of Stonecrest aren't really prepared for any of this. Like, there's not some like long-standing civic center of political activism and political, sort of there's no machine in Stonecrest because it's new. So there's no mechanism for replacing Jason Larry with somebody who's better, like immediately. Like
what
there's going to be a dogfight. I don't know who's going to run for it.
this is a little bit of a technical question, but why Stonecrest is a relatively small city, right? Like
Fifty
why
thousand people.
50,000 people. It's
yeah.
bigger than Decatur.
But I mean, so, but we're not like it's not Atlanta, and even Atlanta.
Yeah,
Everybody thinks about how big Atlanta is. Atlanta's 500,000 people. It's not. It's actually not. It's not.
I know.
A lot of people don't. It's not the 6 million of the metro or 7 million of the metro area. It's a tiny little. But anyway, the point being, I'm a little bit surprised that they opted for the strong mayor form of government to start with on a town that size. I mean, that's generally not best
Jason
practice.
Larry.
Yeah.
Jason Larry.
Yeah,
He
there
wrote
should
the
be a
charter. I
standard.
mean, it's
I
just
know.
that.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, I'm glad that's changed because it's just no reason. Like it's a writ for malfeasance. you know. Anyway,
Speaking of writs for malfeasance, can we dunk on the city of Buckhead idea for a little while? Because I have so many thoughts.
well, this is the old. This is the old. You know, what is it? The boogeyman that keeps coming out of the closet every decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is what now the sixth or seventh time it's been threatened.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually killed by Sam Massel. It's not, it's whether that there's enough pull there to stop it again. I mean, it's
Sam's
hundred
not now.
percent.
I think Sam has left his post with the
Oh,
Buckhead
well,
Coalition.
yeah, that's where that's what I mean, right?
Right.
Like, so not the mayor, and it's several years out of office, and I think, but I mean, look, the excuse is crime, but what, they're going to build their own police force. Guess what, you're going to have much higher taxes than you would have otherwise, and so you're going to just turn around and contract with Atlanta PD.
Right.
Like, so it's manifestly not actually anybody that's like informed about the way cities work. It's not a crime. Like, it's not
So they would build their police force on the back of the social services stuff that they would stop paying for. Like that's how that works. Like the city does things around homelessness and public health. Not a lot, but enough. Like where they would opt out of all of that stuff and use the money to pay for cops.
They
Like
would
that's
opt
the
out of all of
rationale.
the stuff and use enough money to pay for what would constitute a third of a sufficient force for a
Yeah.
cop. They're massively underestimating how expensive a functional, like a real full blown police force would be. And it's
Sure.
not like, I mean, they're talking about basically the third of Atlanta, the upper third of Atlanta. It's a large footprint, relatively low density, large footprint of land. So you need like when they're talking about how many cops that they want, like it's just anybody that's run the numbers knows this isn't, you're not going to improve your policing in this approach.
So there has been an increase in crime,
without question.
And it has hit Buckhead, but not anything like it's hit the rest of the city. It's just they can see a visible change from their baseline up 20-25%, like for violent crime. 10%, something like crazy like that. Like Midtown and downtown is up 400%. Like year over year, as of last week, Zone 5 had 400% more murders than it had in the previous year.
And why is that? What is it? The pandemic? Is it economic hardship? What is the reason that crime has increased so much?
I have some theories, and the pandemic's a big part of it. Like, and violence is up across the country in large cities. Like it's about 25% up in all the large cities around the country. But as of last week, the year-over-year increase in Atlanta was 89% for homicides and 24% for other violent crime. Everything else is down, but their violent crime is up. And the reason, I think, has everything to do with housing. Well, all right. So not everything. A lot to do with housing.
Employment and housing, right? I mean, yeah.
So it's like this. Like if you've got a lease, if you're renting and you've got a lease, you were blocked from eviction because of the CDC rule, but only if you couldn't pay your rent. If you had a lease violation for some other reason, you were evictable. And so a lot of landlords would blow off low-level crime that was happening at their property as long as you were still paying your rent. But if you're not paying your rent and some crime goes on that either creates a violation of your lease or exposes it, they'll kick you out. And if you've got an eviction on your record right now, you're done. Because the demand is so much higher than supply. So a lot of people, perversely, I think this drove the violence rate up because people couldn't call the cops to sort out some sort of distress, because the cops may have revealed a lease violation that would cause the people there to get kicked out. Like the cops show up, there's a noise complaint, the noise complaint violates the lease, and you're out. Or the cops show up and they find that there are 6 people in your apartment when you're on a lease for 4, and everybody gets tossed out and stuff like that.
And this explains, so I saw some of the data that you posted where there's a marked decline in the number of 911 calls, right? And that's actually, I think that's a really interesting hypothesis about what's driving that, because when you see reported crime rates going up and you see 911 calls going down, it's very hard to get that particular dynamic is an interesting, tragic but interesting dynamic, and I think that's a good hypothesis for why.
The thing is, there are 3 other factors going on. One, the cops basically went on a soft strike after Rayshard Brooks. Never mind the public. Like the cops are like, blue flu, we're done. Like you don't support us, we're not going to support you. And the number of arrests have fallen, even though violence is up. So trying to disentangle that. The second thing is, you've got a lot of mental illness that gets caught in school. Like you show up to school, over the course of a year, your behavior starts to deteriorate. A teacher notices something, gets you in front of a school counselor. Hey, all of a sudden somebody's diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar or something else, and they start getting treated. That stopped happening last year. So there's no observation.
Each of the things that you've described here, though, every single one of them are systemic across the country. That every major urban area is dealing with similar issues. And so I'm curious because, we've described how Buckhead, if you take a look at Atlanta as a whole, the numbers look to be higher than some of the other municipalities around the country. And I'm wondering when you did that breakout between, for example, Buckhead being up a much smaller amount than, for example, Midtown or downtown, like if you took Chicago and broke it apart between North Side and South Side, or if you took, if you took LA and broke it apart, well, I mean, LA, Jesus, it's like 45 different departments anyway. But I mean, if you did the same sort of geographic breakdown within an MSA, whether we'd see, similar trends. And then I'm also curious, and I don't know that this is necessarily the case, but Atlanta, New York was sort of the standard bearer from going from early 1990 crime rates to, circa 2012, where it was, an unbelievably small number compared to, like, New York went from top 5 murder rate to like number 243 in terms of MSAs within the country. It was astounding. But Atlanta also, not quite that dramatic, but Atlanta went from 300, 400 murders a year to like 80, right? Like, so also an enormously, and so even like, that's an important thing, I think, for people to understand now, even with an 89% increase over the last couple of months, and let's assume that holds true for the rest of the year, we're still like at a third of what it used to be, 15 or 20 years ago. And so I'm just wondering if what we're seeing, like the big jump in Atlanta, is actually because we were coming off of a relatively proportionate low base. Like all the talk 10 years ago was Chicago and how bad everything was in Chicago. I'm just curious what your thinking is on that.
So like when it hit a low like 2 or 3 years ago, they were running, I want to say, about 14 murders per 100,000, which comparatively to the national average is about 3 times higher. But when you compare that to large cities, it was in the middle, maybe a little lower.
Yep.
Like cities always, since anybody's ever been like looking at crime ever, since when cities were 98% white, like they've always had a murder rate that was higher than other other areas. Yep. It's just the nature of urban life. They were bouncing off a low. But nobody's had a 90% move.
Yeah, like, no, it's jarring.
Yeah, it's like the next biggest one I think is 60, and like that's and the thing that's interesting is the cities that had big moves also have very high levels of inequality, like New Orleans, Seattle, San Francisco. But Atlanta has the highest measured level of inequality in the United States. Like the racial inequality, yes, but also just overall economic
PC index, the whole thing. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that.
And I think that's what's doing it. That it's direct. It is a direct correlation to the local inequality. And so unless like this doesn't, what I'm saying is it doesn't go away when the pandemic does, because the inequality is still driving things. So it might fall, but I don't think it's going to fall all the way back to the 2018 baseline.
So when I think about cities where there's a very high level of inequality and where they had police force violence against Black citizens and trauma. So like in Atlanta, obviously, it was Rayshard Brooks. And that happened kind of in pandemic time, right? But Baltimore is a really interesting comparable city to Atlanta. Similar size, not as actually, believe it or not as unequal as Atlanta, but close. I mean, Baltimore is like in the same kind of window of terrible as Atlanta is on that front. And Baltimore exploded into crime after Freddie Gray, well before the pandemic. And they have never come back down from that. Like, it is still a huge problem. And so I'm wondering if we're sort of wrongfully attributing pandemic and instead seeing a little bit more of a repressed backlash that is coming out due to some of these inequality and issues that, for example, Baltimore is still trying to reconcile.
I think that if at some point I'm going to make this a math equation, and I think it's not additive, it's multiplicative. Pandemic times inequality.
Yeah.
Like the harder the pandemic hit you, the harder like times the existing inequality.
I mean, throwing a little bit of blue flu sauce after a police killing of an unarmed
Yep.
black man, and yeah, you've got this kind of perfect storm.
Because the other cities that had big spikes also had some history of discriminatory policing and some high profile police event that like a police brutality event that required a prosecution. I mean, Seattle had a bunch of stuff. Um, the other one that was high on the list was St. Louis,
Yeah, of course. I mean,
and all of a sudden it starts to clarify. Like I'm gonna be working through all of this into a big, like my lifetime Pulitzer shot is coming in a few months on this stuff. Um, Trying to put all of this together in a way that says, look, this is what caused this.
Yeah.
Like, and here's Atlanta's example. Um,
While we're on that front, why don't you tell since we've got a few minutes left, why don't you tell our listeners about the Atlanta Objective, which is a subscription-based Substack newsletter that you started. And George, there is no other journalist in Atlanta who is doing the work that George Chidi is doing. And I think that he's filling a niche that really is an important one that hasn't gone covered. So some of the things that George has been talking about, Stonecrest, the crime rate, all of that is covered in the Atlanta Objective Substack. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that project? Tell us how it's going, and more importantly, tell people how they can sign up for that.
And pay you.
So
And pay you.
it is the Atlanta Objective at Substack.com.
Proud subscriber here.
Thank you very much. I'm deeply grateful. I have 125 paid subscribers at this point. I'm shooting for 600. Like that means I can do this and nothing else and keep a roof over my head. And the discussion that Hans and I have just had about what's causing the crime and how to look at it is essentially what this Substack newsletter is about. I have a giant, amazing database of 911 phone calls that I'm starting to slice and dice in order to show who's been the subject of crime, who's been talking about crime, what the police response has been like, what is working and what isn't in this moment of like this explosion of crime in Atlanta. And the idea here is to write about it in a way that isn't some parade of mug shots without any context that doesn't do any good for anyone unless you're a white supremacist looking for a reason to hate black people because the only time they're in the news is because somebody gets shot. Like this is about solving that problem.
So not the AJC is what you're saying.
Basically, yes. Like I started this thing because I saw a piece of the AJC and got pissed.
Yeah, I remember that. It's anyway. So yeah, you're doing God's work, man.
Trying. We'll see.
We need a strong AJC.
We do.
We do. Every community needs a strong.
Yeah, the way we get a strong AJC is when the Atlanta Objective wins a Pulitzer Prize for doing the work they should have been doing all along. That's how we get a strong AJC. So you go, George. Keep it up.
Do what I can.
Hey, I had a question for George. Can I, it's somewhat
sure.
related. I'm curious about this because this really you just kind of broke this, George. I'm interested in this because it is complex. The Gunna and Young Thug springing of a host of people out of at a Fulton County detention.
So I've been watching like the connection between the music industry and violent crime for a little while because I'm a numbers guy. We just went through this.
Yep.
Like, I don't think the numbers make any sense around how many rappers are getting shot and killed in Atlanta. Like, there are too many rappers being killed in Atlanta for it to be random. Something's happening. And so I'm paying some attention. And when I saw this story come through on Channel 2 over the weekend about Young Thug and Gunna, two rappers, they've got the #1 album in America right now. They are important. They went to Fulton County Jail and they bailed out and they said 30 people. Like, because they are as a protest against poor people having to be staying in jail because of bail. And I'm all for that, like if that's what it is, except that's not what it was. Like they came in with a list of 6 people, but at the top of which was a murder suspect who should not have been eligible for bail at all. In fact, his bail had been revoked in February, and the jail never got that order. So when they found out that he'd been released, like the prosecutors were like, he's going to go intimidate the witness in the trial he's about to go on. And they immediately yanked his bond and brought him back to jail. Like, I want to know why the hell that guy was at the top of their list. He's not random. There's some personal connection there. And I just don't know what it is. And they're being disingenuous about it. They're like, oh, we think he's, and maybe this is true, like they think he's been unfairly accused. Look, the guy is on tape shooting and killing a man at a hotel in South Atlanta.
Allegedly.
Like, well, that's the thing. It's like there's a tape. I've seen the tape.
Right.
Like
he
pulls.
That's gonna be discussed in court and picked apart.
Yes.
And,
I'm sorry. I don't mean to like. We're not. I don't want to create a legal problem. Suffice it to say that he is innocent until proven guilty. Like, but there is a reason that he is going on trial.
Sure.
And like, so there's like they're arguing that he wasn't, like, that this is a bad prosecution or something like that. That's fine. But that's not what they said. They said that this was about this other thing, and it's not. And now, like, my radar's up. Like, I've got antenna doing the thing. Like, all right, what's going on here? Because Young Thug's been in and out of jail. Like, his house was tossed by the police. Like, he barely escaped a drug trafficking charge. He violated his probation for failing a drug test a couple of years ago. Like, there's an assault charge out there. He was implicated in this he was sued in the shooting around, like, when Wheezy's bus got shot up a few years ago. He got sued for that. Like, there's a lot of stuff circling around these guys, and nobody wants to talk about that because nobody wants to sound like Tipper Gore from 1986 talking about the evils of rap music and sounding like some horrid racist for attacking black musicians. Like, I don't want to do any of that. I'm just looking at a crime problem. Like, there's a statistical aberration here that deserves a little examination.
Or they're afraid of winding up on somebody's list. I mean, that's the other thing. There's a lot of risk. I mean, there's risk in what we do as reporters, bringing light to this stuff. So I definitely think that that's certainly on people's minds too, as they choose to delve into this, because you don't know what rock you're going to kick over.
This is true.
That's
and I'm bad at gauging my risks along those lines.
Yes, you are. That's why I'm always praying for you, George. I've got you in my thoughts and prayers constantly. Like, please protect my friend George. He's a good reporter, but he's going to piss off the wrong person. No, you'll be all right.
I think I'll be fine.
Pine Lake has got your back.
They do.
Yep. Good folks over in Pine Lake. Well, it is 7 o'clock, believe it or not, and that is the end of our show. My guests today are George Chidi and Hans Utz, both Decaturish contributors. George Chidi's new Substack is the Atlanta Objective on Substack, so Google that, find it, support the wonderful work that George is doing. We will be back next Wednesday at 6 o'clock. I am going to try to figure out who's going to be on that show. The next show, though, on the 12th, is going to be Senator Elena Parent and State Rep Mary Margaret Oliver, and possibly a couple of other of our local DeKalb delegation as well. So that will be really cool. We'll get to unpack the most recent legislative session and ask them some questions about what's going on there. So that'll be fun. And, so thank you, everybody who tuned in. Really sorry about the break, but we will be hitting this show pretty hard for the next few months. So that is definitely something you can expect, especially as the elections come up and we need to start covering our local forums. George, you always do this to me. You always do this weird shit on the Zoom, and I can't concentrate. I can't focus. It's hard enough trying to talk out of my ass without you doing that. Anyway, it's good to see everybody. Good to see you, Hans and George. Good to see you, readers. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday. We will see you next Wednesday. Y'all have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Hasta.